The city woke beneath a sun that did not warm. It judged. Its light poured across the glass kingdom of Adawale Enterprises, where power sat upon thrones of silence and fear walked beside every employee. In that tower, hearts had learned to beat quietly, and faces wore smiles that never reached their eyes. Yet this morning, a single moment of accident would reveal the cruelty hiding behind success and the price one woman would pay to keep her dignity alive. Inside the vast office that smelled of leather and control, Mr. Adwale sat behind a desk broad enough to separate him from the rest of the world. He was a man shaped by victory, hardened by wealth, his voice always calm, his gaze always sharp enough to cut. Across the shining floor came Ngozi, his maid of many years, her uniform faded but spotless, her posture humble but proud. She moved softly, carrying a tray of tea, her steps echoing the quiet faith of a woman who had accepted her place in a world that refused to see her. The golden vase near his desk caught the morning light, its beauty fragile, its price beyond her imagination. She had dusted it for years without incident, careful as one handling dreams that did not belong to her. But fate never warns before it strikes. Her sleeve brushed the table, and the vase toppled, hesitated in the air, then fell. The crash tore through the office like a scream, shards scattering across the marble like glittering reminders of class and power. Adwale rose slowly, every movement precise, dangerous. His voice dropped low, the kind that forced silence from everyone around. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said. Ngozi fell to her knees, gathering pieces, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with shame. "It was an accident, sir." "I'm sorry," she whispered. His eyes narrowed. "Accident. People like you should never touch things that cost more than your life. You were born to serve, Ngozi. That is your purpose." The room froze. Employees stood in the hallway, pretending not to watch, their fear greater than their pity. Ngozi's fingers bled where glass cut deep, yet she kept collecting the shards, her lips pressed together, her dignity refusing to die even as her pride bled out on the floor. Inside her chest, a silent strength whispered that no man's words could define her worth. By the door stood Chidi, her 12-year-old son, his small hands clenched, his young eyes burning. He had seen poverty, but never this humiliation. He had known hunger, but never this kind of pain. In that instant, the innocence of childhood left him, replaced by something fierce and unyielding. Adwale's laughter echoed behind him, rich, cruel, final. "Get out," the man said, turning away. "And don't come back." Ngozi rose, slow and graceful despite the tremor in her knees, and walked through the corridor of silence, where no one dared to meet her eyes. Her son followed, his heart pounding with words he was too young to say. Outside, the wise sun blazed harshly, and the tower loomed above them like a monument to their shame. Chidi stopped and turned, his gaze fixed on the building that had broken his mother's spirit. The city noise faded until only his breathing remained. "One day," he murmured, voice trembling with both pain and promise, "I'll own this place, and he'll remember my name." The wind lifted his words skyward, sealing a vow that destiny would one day demand he fulfill. The glow of the city faded quickly beyond the rich man's towers, giving way to the broken heartbeat of Lagos, the slums, where hunger had a face and dreams walked barefoot. Here, tin roofs clattered under wind and rain, and smoke from kerosene lamps rose like unanswered prayers. It was in this world that Ngozi and Chidi returned, carrying the sting of humiliation from Adewale's office, but refusing to let it crush the flame still burning within them. Yet beneath that flame, poverty waited, patient, heavy, and merciless. The slum was a place where sound never slept. Children cried from empty stomachs, traders shouted through the night, and laughter came only from those who had learned to find joy in survival itself. Ngozi's small room stood at the end of a narrow alley, its walls patched with cardboard, its floor a mix of dust and memory. But inside that space, hope still dared to exist. Every morning, before the sun stretched across the city, Ngozi left to work, washing clothes for strangers, scrubbing market stalls, carrying loads twice her strength. She moved from one job to the next, sweat dripping like sacrifice, her heart carrying the same prayer each day, that her son's life would not mirror hers. Chidi would wait for her by the window, his eyes following her silhouette disappearing into the mist of dawn. He had seen her fingers blistered, her back bent, her breath heavy. Yet she never complained. In the evenings, when the world grew darker and the streets came alive with the smell of roasted corn and dust, she would return, her clothes damp with sweat, her pockets light with coins. But her voice, soft and warm, always carried peace. She would sit beside Chidi under the weak glow of their kerosene lamp, whispering stories, tales of kings who rose from the soil, of warriors who fought without swords, of dreams that refused to die. And every night, as she spoke, Chidi believed a little more that his destiny could be greater than his pain. School was not a place for children like him, but Chidi made it one. When he was not selling sachet water on the roadside, he studied from tattered books others had thrown away. His classroom was the street corner, his teacher, the wind, his light, the broken street lamp that flickered above the dirt road. Other boys mocked him, some pitied him, but he never stopped. He read aloud to himself, pronouncing words he did not yet understand, repeating them until they became part of him. The same fire that was born inside Adewale's office grew brighter each night, as if his mother's sacrifices were fueling it from her veins. But the city demanded a price for every dream. Ngozi's body, worn by endless work, began to betray her. At first it was only a cough, small, hidden behind laughter. Then came the fevers, the dizziness, the moments when her hands shook as she lifted buckets of water. Yet she kept going, her pride refusing to let her weakness show. "Rest, Mama," Chidi would beg. "Let me work today." She would smile faintly, brushing his cheek. "No, my son. Your hands are meant for books, not burdens. Mine were made to carry us both." Days turned to weeks, and the cough grew heavier, the light in her eyes dimmer. Still she worked. The market women would tell her to rest. She would wave them off with a tired smile, whispering that she couldn't afford the luxury of stopping. Her world was a balance between love and survival, between holding on and falling apart. One evening, as rain began to fall in thin silver threads, Ngozi sat behind her small roadside stall, selling roasted plantain beneath a faded umbrella. The streets glistened with puddles reflecting the trembling lights of passing cars. Chidi stood nearby, his school books under one arm, waiting for her to finish so they could walk home together. Her cough returned, sharper this time, but she forced a smile, serving a customer as if nothing was wrong. The night deepened, the crowd thinned, and the rain grew heavier. Ngozi's breathing slowed, her hands trembled as she counted her few coins. For the first time, her vision blurred, the world tilting around her like a cruel dream. She pressed a hand to her chest, her breath breaking, her body shivering as exhaustion finally won the war she had fought for years. Chidi turned just as her tray slipped from her hands, coins scattering across the wet ground like tiny echoes of every sacrifice she had made. He ran toward her, shouting her name, his books falling into the mud. The night swallowed the sound as Ngozi's body collapsed beside her stall, her eyes half open, her voice a whisper, lost to the rain. Around them, the city carried on, unaware that a mother's strength had finally reached its limit, and a boy's destiny had just begun its next test. By 15, Chidi had learned that the world could wound without touching. The school that promised to shape his future instead became the place that tested his pride. Its corridors echoed with laughter that carried more cruelty than warmth, its classrooms built not for learning, but for comparison. And yet, amid the whispers that mocked his poverty, he stood like a shadow of his mother, quiet, steady, and unbreakable. The scholarship that brought him there was both a blessing and a brand. His uniform was clean but worn, his shoes repaired so many times that they carried the story of his struggles. The other students, children of businessmen, politicians, and executives, looked at him with curiosity first, then with contempt. They whispered "charity case" as he walked past, their voices low but sharp enough to cut. Even some teachers saw him not as promise, but as pity, treating him as though education were a gift he had not earned. Yet in every humiliation, he saw only one thing: his mother's bleeding hands gathering broken glass and refusing to bow. One afternoon, when a teacher mocked his torn notebook in front of the class, the laughter that followed filled the room like fire. "You must be grateful we even let you in here, Chidi," the teacher said, smiling as if cruelty were wisdom. Chidi's face burned, but his eyes did not drop. He rose from his seat, voice calm, steady, carrying the quiet thunder of dignity. "I came here to learn, sir," he said, "not to be reminded of what I already know, that I am poor. But poverty doesn't mean I can't rise." The room fell silent. Even the teacher's smirk wavered for a heartbeat before turning away. From that day, whispers changed their tone. Some mocked him still, but others watched him with new respect. Among them was Mr. Durojaya, the literature teacher, a man who saw beyond clothes and names, who recognized fire when others only saw smoke. After class, he called Chidi aside and handed him an old book, its cover faded, but its pages alive with wisdom. "Dreams," he said softly, "belong to those who refuse to bow." It was the first time anyone outside his home had spoken to him with kindness. Chidi's determination deepened. He began taking small jobs after school, carrying crates at the market, cleaning shop floors, selling newspapers at dawn. Each coin he earned went to school fees and his mother's medicine, though she insisted she didn't need it. "Save it for your books," she would say, smiling through her cough. But the cough had grown darker, heavier, its echo following her even in sleep. She hid it from him, burying her pain beneath laughter, afraid that worry would break his focus. Every evening, he returned home exhausted, but alive with purpose. Ngozi would wait by the doorway, her eyes filled with pride that masked her pain. They would eat together, sometimes rice, sometimes only boiled yam, and she would ask about his lessons. He would tell her of the poems he read, of the stories that spoke of courage and kings, and each time he did, she saw the reflection of the man he was becoming. Her sickness worsened, but her joy grew, for she saw her son walking toward the destiny she had prayed for in silence. Weeks passed, and the signs of her decline became harder to hide. Her hands trembled as she cooked, her steps slowed as she walked to the market. When Chidi noticed, she would laugh it away, saying the weather had made her tired. He wanted to believe her, needed to believe her, for his entire strength rested on the idea that she was indestructible. At school, his efforts began to show. Mr. Durojaya helped him apply for essay competitions, guided him through books he'd never known existed, taught him how to use pain as power. "Your story will not end in the streets, Chidi," the teacher said one afternoon. "But remember, the higher you climb, the heavier the world will try to pull you down." And indeed, life began to pull. Between school and work, Chidi barely slept. The burden of survival sat heavy on his shoulders, but he carried it with silent grace. Sometimes, late at night, he would hear his mother coughing behind the thin wall that separated their small room. He would pause his reading, listen, and tell himself it would pass. Hope, after all, was the only medicine they could afford. But hope can only lie for so long. One evening, Chidi finished work early and hurried home, the setting sun bleeding across the sky like a warning. He called out as he entered, But the house was silent, except for a low, broken cough from behind the closed door. When he pushed it open, his world stopped. His mother sat on the floor, blood on her hands, her breath trembling, her eyes wide with pain and fear. The coins from her pocket rolled across the dirt floor, clinking softly like echoes of time running out. Hospitals do not smell of medicine. They smell of prayers and loss, of tears hidden behind forced smiles and walls that have heard too many goodbyes. In one of those pale, overcrowded wards, beneath flickering lights and the hum of old machines, Ngozi lay still, her body frail, but her spirit unbroken. The air was thick with disinfectant and quiet despair, and at her bedside sat Chidi, clutching her hand as though he could hold her soul in place by sheer will. Outside, the rain fell softly, as if heaven itself was mourning before the world did. Her breathing came in shallow waves, her chest rising and falling like the tide of a tired sea. The nurses moved past without a glance. She was just another patient among many, another woman the city would not remember. But to Chidi, she was everything. His teacher, his shelter, his world. He had spent the night beside her, watching her fight against the darkness that was slowly pulling her away. The small fan above their bed rattled with every turn, pushing hot air instead of comfort. He wiped her forehead gently, whispering, "You'll be fine, Mama. I'll take you home soon." But she only smiled. That same fragile smile she always wore when she didn't want him to see the truth. Her voice was weak when she finally spoke, but her words carried the strength of generations. "Chidi," she whispered, "you must listen to me now." He leaned closer, his eyes wet, his hands trembling in hers. "Don't live to prove them wrong," she said, her lips trembling but her gaze steady. "Live to prove yourself right. Promise me that your heart will never turn bitter, even when the world is cruel. Promise me you'll rise, but you'll never become like those who made us bow." Her words entered him like sacred fire, quiet, painful, unforgettable. He nodded, unable to speak, the tears he'd fought for years now falling freely. The hospital around them disappeared. Only her voice remained, echoing in his soul. He wanted to hold on, to beg for more time, but deep inside, he knew she was already leaving. Her fingers cold, her eyes half closed, her breathing fading into silence. And when the final breath left her lips, it did not sound like defeat. It sounded like peace. The world around him kept moving, nurses passing, voices calling. But Chidi sat frozen beside her, his heart hollow. He buried his face in her hands, whispering prayers that came out as sobs. The woman who had carried him through storms had finally let go, leaving him standing at the edge of a life he didn't know how to live alone. The funeral came days later, small and simple. He borrowed money from neighbors to buy a coffin, carried her body to the burial ground under a sky too bright for mourning. There were no flowers, no choir, no speeches, only the sound of soil falling softly over wood. Each handful of dirt felt like a weight pressing against his chest, a reminder of all she had endured so he could stand. Around the grave, the world seemed painfully indifferent. Men in torn shirts dug graves beside hers, while, not far away, luxury cars roared past, carrying men like Adewale, who would never know the price of another's suffering. As Chidi watched the dirt cover the last trace of his mother's body, the memory of that golden office came flooding back. The cold laughter, the broken vase, the cruel words that had pierced her heart deeper than poverty ever could. He stood still long after the others had left, the wind lifting dust around him. The same boy who had once studied under streetlights now stood in silence at his mother's grave, a man born not by years, but by pain. His clothes clung to his skin with sweat and grief, but his eyes were no longer those of a child. They were steady, burning, searching for something beyond mercy, something like justice. He thought of the last thing she said, her voice faint but fearless. "Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right. The word settled in his heart like a seed waiting for its season. Yet alongside them, another voice rose, the echo of the man who had humiliated her, the laughter that had followed her silence. Chidi knelt beside the fresh mound of earth, his fingers pressing into the soil still warm from the sun. He looked at the grave, his voice barely more than a whisper, trembling with both grief and promise. "The man who broke her spirit will remember her name," he said. The wind rose gently, carrying his vow through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, the air around him felt alive, as if the heavens themselves had heard his oath and would one day demand that it be kept. Years passed, but time didn't heal. It forged. The boy who once knelt beside his mother's grave rose into a young man tempered by pain and sharpened by purpose. Chidi had walked through hunger, humiliation, and loss, and now every scar upon his soul had become a map guiding him forward. The city that once ignored him would soon learn his name, for he had promised the dead, and promises made in grief burn longer than fire. The years that followed were merciless. Chidi worked at construction sites by day and studied by night, saving every coin, every moment, for a chance that might never come. But fate, though late, keeps its word to those who refuse to surrender. He earned a government scholarship to the University of Lagos, a place where dreams were born and buried in the same breath. There, he studied business administration, not because he loved numbers, but because he wanted to understand the machinery that had once crushed his mother's dignity. The university was a world divided by invisible walls. The rich arrived in polished cars, their laughter easy, their confidence loud. The poor, like Chidi, came armed with silence, hope, and the fear of being reminded they didn't belong. He faced jokes about his clothes, his accent, his background, each insult cutting deep, yet polishing the armor he was building within. Professors praised the wealthy students, calling them leaders of tomorrow, while men like Chidi were treated as temporary shadows, but he refused to bend. Every time they mocked him, he remembered the broken vase, his mother's shaking hands, her final words whispering strength into his blood. Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right. Among the many faces in that cruel hall of learning, a few became light in his darkness. Amara, a soft-spoken literature student from the same slum, became his first true friend. Loyal, brilliant, and unafraid to challenge him when ambition turned him bitter. Professor Durajaye, now teaching part-time at the university, found him again and became his quiet mentor, reminding him that wisdom meant nothing without compassion. But not everyone came to lift him. Tunde Adewale, the CEO's son, arrogant, loud, and entitled, became his rival, unaware that the man he mocked carried the weight of his father's sins. Competition between them burned fiercely. In class debates, in project presentations, Chidi's calm intellect clashed with Tunde's inherited confidence. The faculty watched in fascination, unaware that behind every answer Chidi gave lived years of hunger, loss, and a mother's dying wish. He studied harder than anyone, often falling asleep at library desks, his eyes red from exhaustion, but his spirit unwilling to break. When money ran out, he took jobs washing cars, cleaning offices, even selling recharge cards on campus corners. Every night, as he walked back to his small rented room, he whispered to his mother's memory, "I'm still trying, Mama. I'm still climbing." By his final year, his name had begun to circulate among students and lecturers, the boy who came from nowhere and outran every obstacle. His grades were unmatched, his ideas bold, his will unshakable. For his final project, he built a small business model that provided affordable stationery to underprivileged students, a company born from the same hunger he once endured. He started with nothing but borrowed pens, recycled paper, and an old market table. Yet from that scrap of hope, something alive began to grow. Amara helped him manage the small accounts. Professor Durajaya guided him through business plans. Even Tunde, his rival, began to notice the spark that wouldn't die. "You'll burn out chasing perfection," Tunde once said with a smirk. Chidi only smiled. "Better to burn than to bow," he replied. His words echoed across the campus like prophecy. Months passed, and the small business began to take root. Students who once mocked him now bought from him. Professors who ignored him now praised his discipline. Chidi worked long hours, sleeping only a few hours each night, but he didn't mind. Every success, however small, felt like a conversation with his mother's spirit, a reminder that dignity, once lost, could be reborn through perseverance. But destiny, ever cruel and cunning, rarely lets peace linger for long. One night, long after the campus had fallen silent, Chidi sat at a dusty desk in his tiny room, drafting proposals to expand his business. His laptop screen flickered under dim light, his fingers trembling from fatigue, but his eyes alive with determination. Then a notification blinked. "You have one new email." He clicked it absent-mindedly, expecting another rejection. Instead, the subject line froze his breath. "Investment offer. Adawale Group." His heart pounded as he read the message, a formal invitation to discuss funding for his business. For a long moment, he sat motionless, the ghost of his mother's pain rising within him. The very name that had shattered their lives now reached out a hand wrapped in gold. The fire he had carried for years roared back to life, whispering through clenched teeth, "The game has begun." Fate never forgets the promises made in pain. It only waits for the right room to echo them. Years after the day dignity broke, the boy who had once been dismissed as invisible now walked through the towering glass doors of Adawale Enterprises once more. The same marble floors gleamed beneath his feet. The same air of arrogance hung heavy. But this time, he did not come as a servant's son. Chidi entered as a junior consultant, sharp suit, calm eyes, and a storm buried beneath his silence. The hunter had returned to the lion's den, not to beg, but to learn how the predator ruled. The meeting room stretched like a throne hall. Long table, high windows, men and women seated in expensive suits pretending confidence before their king. At the head sat Mr. Adawale, still powerful, still feared, though now his hair had grayed at the temples and his eyes carried the weight of years spent commanding without compassion. He glanced briefly at the new consultant and moved on, not recognizing the son of the woman he once destroyed. But Chidi remembered every word, every insult, every shard of broken glass that had once cut through his mother's hands. The smell of that office, polished wood, old cologne, ambition, was the same as the day his childhood ended. As the meeting began, Adwale's voice filled the room, smooth, commanding, rehearsed. He spoke of expansion, profits, and power, never of people. When a nervous young employee made a mistake in presenting figures, Adwale's smile turned cold. "Is this the standard we hire now?" he said, his tone sharp enough to slice through the man's confidence. Laughter trickled from the others, but Chidi's gaze remained steady. He didn't intervene. He didn't flinch. He only watched, the same way his mother had watched him once gather her broken dignity from the floor. Every cruel word from Adawale became fuel. Every arrogant gesture reminded Chidi of why he was there, not for revenge alone, but to understand the system that allowed such men to thrive. He listened, observed, absorbed. The company was a kingdom of manipulation hidden behind elegant suits and polite lies. The powerful spoke of ethics in daylight and corruption in whispers after dark. Weeks turned into months, and Chidi began to understand the rhythm of power. Who feared whom? Who spoke truth only when drunk? Who smiled before betrayal? He built allies quietly. Amara, now a data analyst at the firm, remained his loyal confidant. Mr. Durajaya, his old mentor, kept in touch, warning him to learn without becoming them. But revenge has a voice that grows louder the longer you try to silence it. Every day, Chidi stood across from Adewale. The urge to expose him pulsed through his veins, restrained only by patience and purpose. One afternoon, as Adewale left the boardroom after humiliating yet another staff member, Chidi lingered behind. His eyes traced the empire his enemy had built, the paintings, the plaques, the hollow grandeur. Behind the luxury, he could sense the rot. He knew no empire stood that tall without secrets buried deep beneath its floors. His curiosity turned into quiet investigation. He began staying late, working through files others ignored, analyzing patterns in the company's accounts. At first it seemed ordinary, profits rising, partnerships expanding, but small irregularities caught his attention. Missing signatures, duplicate invoices, offshore transfers hidden behind fake subsidiaries. It was the language of greed, fluent and familiar. Each night, as the building emptied, Chidi's desk lamp burned on, casting long shadows on the polished floor. He could almost feel his mother's presence beside him, whispering courage into his silence. Don't become them, but never let them forget you. Then, one night, the truth stepped out of hiding. The corridors were empty, the air heavy with the hum of machines. Chidi followed a trail of encrypted documents stored under a hidden drive, files marked private holdings. When he opened them, the numbers exploded across his screen. Bribes, offshore accounts, false contracts, all signed by Adewale himself. His hands trembled as he scrolled further, his heart pounding with the rhythm of revelation. At the bottom of the page, one line burned like a prophecy. Project Ngozi, Asset Disposal. The name struck him like lightning. His mother's name, used as a code in Adewale's corruption. The silence of the night deepened, and in it, vengeance began to breathe. Even empires built on marble and pride have cracks invisible to their kings. Power, like fire, glows brightest just before it burns itself out. In the months that followed, Adewale Enterprises, once the untouchable crown of Lagos business, began to tremble beneath the weight of its own corruption. The man who had humiliated others for weakness was now surrounded by the scent of his own downfall. And somewhere in the shadows of that collapsing throne, Chidi watched with the silence of destiny fulfilled. It began quietly, as all great falls do. A series of anonymous tips reached the authorities. Leaked emails, altered contracts, whispers too consistent to ignore. News reporters started circling like vultures sensing the end, their questions sharp, their headlines hungering for blood. Inside the building that had once commanded fear, unease spread like smoke. Board members argued in hushed tones. Loyalists turned hesitant. Investors began to withdraw one by one. Adewale, still defiant, called it all rumors spread by the jealous. But behind his eyes flickered something unfamiliar: doubt. He held emergency meetings that stretched into the night, his voice rising higher each time the truth pressed closer. The same men who had once laughed at his cruelty now avoided his gaze. The arrogance that had built his empire became the very storm tearing it apart. Files vanished, numbers stopped making sense, and employees whispered about government audits. The lion who once ruled the boardroom had started to bleed, and the scent drew every predator near. Through it all, Chidi remained calm, invisible, unthreatening. He attended meetings, took notes, offered solutions that no one heard, and quietly, he built something of his own. With Amara's help and the guidance of his old mentor, Professor Durajaye, he registered his own startup, a small firm focused on ethical business practices. It began humbly. One rented room, a few computers, and a handful of dreamers who still believed honesty could survive in commerce. But beneath its simplicity lay a quiet fire, his mother's name embedded in its foundation, Ngozi Enterprises. The irony did not escape him. The same city that once mocked him now looked to him for stability. When Adewale's scandals deepened, Small investors started turning to Chidi's company, drawn by his reputation for fairness and integrity. Employees from Adawale's crumbling empire began to seek him out secretly, whispering that they were tired of fear, that they admired his humility, that they wanted to start anew under someone who led with humanity. For the first time, power returned to the hands of a man who did not desire it, only justice. Meanwhile, Adawale's world shrank. His partners distanced themselves, his rivals scented blood and tore into his empire with lawsuits and investigations. The newspapers that once praised him now called him the fallen giant. He raged against the storm, denying everything, firing those who questioned him, threatening the rest with ruin. But arrogance cannot fight truth forever. Slowly, inevitably, the empire cracked from its foundations, not with the noise of an explosion, but with the quiet crumble of pride meeting consequence. Chidi never gloated. Each headline about Adawale's downfall felt like a chapter closing, not with triumph, but with a deep, aching justice. He remembered his mother's last words. Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right. It was not revenge he felt, but completion, the kind that comes when pain finally meets its purpose. Yet even as he built and rose, he could not shake the image of that day, years ago. The man in a tailored suit, standing above a kneeling woman, mistaking cruelty for strength. Now, the world was watching that same man kneel before his own mistakes. Reporters camped outside the company's gates. Regulators raided offices. Partners demanded repayments that never came. The king had fallen, but he refused to see it. They will regret crossing me, Adawale shouted at his final board meeting, slamming his fist on the table as silence swallowed the room. But this time, no one bowed. Outside those walls, Chidi stood by the street, watching from afar. The same building that once humiliated his mother now carried banners announcing liquidation sales and staff layoffs. It looked smaller now, as though stripped of arrogance, it had lost its shape. Amara stood beside him, her voice quiet. You did it, she said. He shook his head. No, truth did. The next morning, as the city awoke to whispers of collapse, newspapers hit the streets with bold black letters across their front pages. Adawale Group declares bankruptcy. Assets for sale. Chidi held the paper in his hands, the wind tugging at its edges, his heart neither proud nor cold, only still. For years he had dreamed of this moment, but standing there, he felt not victory, only the weight of what it had cost. Behind the printed words, his mother's voice seemed to echo. Rise without becoming what broke you. A decade had carved him from pain into power. The world that once looked down on him now stood in awe as black cars lined the street outside the crumbling glass tower of Adawale Enterprises. Reporters crowded behind metal barricades, cameras flashing like lightning as rumors spread that a new owner had come to claim the ruins. The whispers turned into stunned silence when the car door opened, and Chidi Ngozi stepped out. Not the boy of pity, but a man carved from fire, the CEO of Ngozi Group Holdings, the empire born from ashes. He walked through the gates with calm, measured steps, every inch of his presence commanding respect. The same marble lobby that once echoed with his mother's humiliation now trembled beneath the weight of his return. The old security guard, gray-haired and tired, stared in disbelief before bowing slightly. Chidi nodded in acknowledgement, his expression unreadable, his eyes carrying the quiet storm of memory. Every corner of the building whispered ghosts, the clink of a broken vase, the laughter of the rich, the silence of the powerless. Now the balance has shifted. Inside the boardroom, everything felt smaller than it once had. The air of authority that had once filled it was gone, replaced by dust, faded portraits, and the scent of abandonment. On the long table lay the acquisition documents, thick with legal jargon and the weight of destiny. Around the table sat journalists, company representatives, and a few former employees who had returned to witness what history would later call the day justice wore a suit. The chairman overseeing the sale, an older lawyer with trembling hands, cleared his throat. "Mr. Chidi Ngozi," he said, "upon signing these documents, you will officially own all remaining assets of the Adawale Group, including its properties, subsidiaries, and corporate identity." The words hung heavy in the room, a poetic sentence 20 years in the making. Chidi said nothing. He picked up the pen, its gold barrel cold against his fingers, and paused. For a moment, the walls around him blurred. He saw his mother kneeling again, her hands trembling as shards of glass drew blood. He heard Odwale's voice, sharp, proud, cruel, declaring that people like them were born to serve. And he saw himself, a child standing helplessly by the door, vowing that one day he would own this place. The weight of that promise pressed against his chest as he lowered the pen and signed. The cameras flashed, journalists leaned forward, and history shifted in that single motion. The man who had once been humiliated in this building now owned it. When he finished, he closed the folder gently, his movements calm, deliberate, reverent, as though he were laying flowers on a grave. "This is not revenge," he said quietly to the room. "This is restoration." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then building as those present realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. Some cried, some smiled, but Chidi did not bask in glory. His heart carried too much memory for celebration. He turned and walked toward the wide office window where years ago his mother had once stood, waiting for orders, never recognition. The city stretched before him now, vast, restless, unknowing that history had just corrected itself. Behind him, Amara entered the room, her voice soft but trembling with pride. "You did it," she said. Chidi exhaled slowly, his reflection merging with the skyline and the glass. "No," he murmured. "She did." For a moment, silence filled the air, as though even the building was listening. The ghosts of humiliation replaced by the quiet dignity of justice. The acquisition was complete. The empire that had destroyed his mother now bore her name. But fate, it seemed, had one last scene left to play. The doors of the boardroom opened behind him, and footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, heavy with age. The air shifted. The journalists fell silent. Chidi turned, his eyes meeting the face he had memorized in childhood nightmares. Adewale, older now, his hair white, his pride faded but not gone, stood in the doorway. For 20 years, destiny had waited for this glance. Their eyes locked, one filled with guilt, the other with quiet reckoning. The world seemed to hold its breath as time itself whispered, "The sun has returned." The years had not been kind to Adewale. The once mighty lion of Lagos now walked with the weight of defeat on his shoulders, his power reduced to memories that no longer obeyed him. His voice, once feared across boardrooms, now trembled with the fragility of age. Yet even in ruin, he clung to pride, unaware that fate had brought him to the very doorstep of his reckoning. When his eyes met Chidi's in that boardroom, time fractured. Recognition did not come all at once. It crept slowly, painfully, as if the past had to carve its way through layers of denial. He saw not the polished suit or the confidence, but the eyes. The same eyes that once stared from the corner of his office, filled with silent fury, as a boy watched his mother kneel among shattered glass. The memory struck like lightning, bright and merciless. His breath caught as the truth formed in his throat. "You," he whispered, the word barely a sound. "You're her son." Chidi said nothing at first. He walked closer, his calmness heavier than anger, his silence echoing louder than accusation. They stood face to face, 20 years apart, but bound by one moment. Neither had escaped. Adewale's knees weakened, and he sank into a chair, staring at the man who had once been a child in his shadow. "I never knew," he murmured, though both of them knew he had simply never cared to look. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier. Chidi's voice, when it came, was soft, steady, unyielding. "I didn't come for revenge," he said. "I came because men like you taught me what not to become." Adewale lowered his gaze. Images from his past played across his mind. The broken vase, the cruel laughter, the woman's bleeding hands gathering pieces of what his arrogance had destroyed. For the first time, he felt the full weight of that day, not as a memory, but as judgment. His lips trembled, words failing him as shame replaced pride. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I thought strength meant power. I didn't know it was mercy." Chidi moved closer, his tone neither cruel nor kind, only honest. "You taught me the cost of pride," he said. "Now you live it." Tears filled Adewale's eyes, old and tired. "I wish I could take it back," he said, his voice breaking. "But I can't." Chidi looked at him for a long moment, the silence between them thick with everything. Time had refused to heal. Then he spoke, his words quiet but sharp as fate. "The world calls me CEO," he said, "but I'm just a maid's son, cleaning your mess." Adewale bowed his head, the sound of his own breathing the only answer left to give. There are victories that break men instead of healing them. After the confrontation, Chidi sat alone in his office, the same room where arrogance once ruled and cruelty had lived unchecked. The city outside pulsed with rumors, waiting for his next move, whispering whether he would destroy Adewale or grant him the mercy life had denied his mother. The empire was his now, but its power came with a question no wealth could answer. How do you punish a man when forgiveness feels heavier than revenge? He stared out the window, the skyline flickering beneath clouds that promised rain. On his desk lay the files, evidence of Adewale's corruption, documents that could ruin what remained of the old man's name. The world would applaud him for exposing it. The press would crown him as justice reborn, and perhaps part of him longed for that moment. But every time he imagined the triumph, his mother's voice echoed softly from memory. "Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right." The words felt like a quiet hand pulling him back from the edge of vengeance. Later that evening, Professor Durajaya visited. The old mentor looked at Chidi's weary eyes and understood the battle being fought behind them. "Justice without mercy," he said gently, "is another kind of cruelty. You've already won, my boy. Now choose what kind of man you'll be when the world stops watching." Chidi said nothing, but his silence spoke of storms. He knew he could end Adewale's reputation in one headline, yet he also knew that doing so would make him everything his mother had feared. Another man, drunk on power. The night stretched long. In the quiet hum of the city, he thought of Ngozi, of her laughter, her pain, her final words whispered between breaths. She had faced humiliation, yet left the world without hatred. Her dignity had survived where her body could not. And now, her son, standing on the mountain of her sacrifice, was being asked to protect that dignity once more, not by revenge, but by restraint. By morning, the decision was made. Chidi ordered the files sealed, refusing to use them. He arranged for Adewale's remaining debts to be cleared quietly, ensuring the man's final years would not end in disgrace. He did not call the press or demand gratitude. He simply chose mercy and carried it like a scar only he would ever feel. Days later, at a crowded press conference, a reporter stood and asked, "Mr. Chidi, why buy a fallen man's empire?" The room fell silent as cameras turned toward him. Chidi looked up, the weight of years reflected in his calm eyes. His voice was steady, his tone soft, but unshakable. "Because even ashes," he said, pausing as memories flickered behind his gaze, "can build a future." The sun rose differently that morning, softer, kinder, as if even the sky had learned humility. The building once called Adewale Enterprises stood reborn, its walls freshly painted, its name replaced with words carved from love and history. Ngozi Industries, built on grace. Cameras flashed as the new sign was unveiled, and the crowd erupted in applause, unaware that behind those 3 words lay an entire lifetime of struggle, loss, and redemption. The maid's name had returned, not whispered in pity, but spoken with honor. For Chidi, the moment was not victory, but vindication. The empire that once symbolized arrogance now carried the story of his mother's endurance. Every brick, every office, every worker now bore witness to her name, a tribute to the woman who had built greatness out of humility. In the crowd stood men and women who had once feared this place, former employees, cleaners, drivers, widows, mothers, their faces glowing with something this city had long forgotten: dignity. As part of his first directive as CEO, Chidi launched a new mission statement that silenced every cynic. "No one who serves with honesty," he declared, "will ever be treated as less than human again." He established the Ngozi Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing education for children of low-income workers, housing for single mothers, and fair wages for domestic staff. What had once been a fortress of greed became a sanctuary of justice. Factories that had been closed reopened under new leadership. Workers returned singing songs of joy, their hands steady, their hearts lighter. Across Lagos, people began to whisper his mother's name, Ngozi, as if invoking a prayer. The newspapers called it the redemption of an empire. International partners praised the company's integrity. The government honored Chidi with awards he accepted in silence. But behind every handshake and every headline, his thoughts remained with one woman. The maid who had once been humiliated for breaking a vase, but had unknowingly built a kingdom through grace. He visited her grave often, leaving white lilies and sitting beside the earth that held her, whispering updates of all that had come to pass. "They know your name now, Mama," he would say quietly. And they say it with respect. In the boardrooms of Ngozi Industries, portraits of leaders and innovators lined the walls, but at the very center hung a different image, a hand-drawn sketch of a woman kneeling to pick up shattered glass, her face serene, her strength unbroken. Beneath it, engraved in gold, were the words, "Grace is stronger than power." Employees passed it every morning, pausing for a heartbeat, reminded of the story that built their future. The transformation of the company rippled beyond business. Communities prospered, schools were funded, and women once silenced found their voices again. Chidi's name spread across continents, but fame never touched his heart. He lived simply, his office free of grandeur, his manner gentle yet firm. A leader who ruled not by fear, but by empathy. The empire that had once been a monument to pride was now a living testament to compassion. One quiet evening, after the last employee had left, Chidi walked into his office to find something new on his desk, a framed photograph. He picked it up slowly. It was his mother, Ngozi, captured long ago in that same building, cleaning the marble floor with her sleeves rolled up, her face calm, her eyes focused. Beneath the photo, a small plaque read, "The foundation upon which everything stands." He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening as he whispered, "Now they see you, Mama. Finally, they see you." The room felt lighter, as if even the walls had begun to breathe again. The city shimmered beneath the evening sun, 1,000 stories breathing in the light of dusk. On the rooftop of Ngozi Industries, Chidi stood alone, the wind tugging gently at his suit, his gaze sweeping across the skyline that once seemed unreachable. The same city that had once mocked him now bowed beneath the symbol of his mother's name. His voice, soft and steady, broke the silence. "She gave me strength. The world gave me pain. I turned both into purpose." The years had softened his edges, but not his conviction. He had built an empire of compassion, one where every worker was treated with the dignity his mother was denied. Success no longer thrilled him. It humbled him. And yet, deep within his calm, he knew one final piece of the circle remained unfinished: forgiveness. One afternoon, the receptionist called up to his office. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "there's an elderly man here asking to see you. He says his name is Adewale." The air in the room stilled. Chidi's pen paused mid-stroke. For a moment, the old rage flickered, that memory of a voice laughing over broken glass. But then came another voice, gentler, eternal, his mother's words echoing softly. "Don't live to prove them wrong. Live to prove yourself right." He told the receptionist to let him in. When Adewale entered, he was not the lion of old. Age had stripped him of vanity. Illness had thinned his frame. His once commanding eyes were now filled with something Chidi had never seen in him before: shame. The older man stood uncertain, his cane trembling, his voice frail as he spoke. "You built something beautiful," he said. "Something I never could. I came to say I'm sorry." The words hung between them, trembling with the weight of 20 years. Chidi did not speak right away. He studied the man, this fallen figure who had once believed himself untouchable, and felt no satisfaction, no triumph, only a quiet ache. He remembered his mother kneeling, her silence louder than any anger. She had endured with grace. And so would he. "I forgive you," Chidi said finally, his tone calm, resolute. "Not because you deserve it, but because she would have wanted it." Adewale's tears came freely, old pride melting into gratitude. "Your mother was a better soul than I ever understood," he whispered. "And you became the man I never learned to be." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You've broken the curse, Chidi, the one I started." Then he was gone, and with him, the last shadow of the past. As night descended, the lights of Lagos blinked alive below, bright as scattered stars. Chidi stood by the window, the golden plaque catching his eye. "Founded in memory of Ngozi, a maid who raised a king." He smiled faintly, his reflection merging with hers in the polished surface, 2 generations sharing one legacy: her grace, his strength, their redemption. He reached out, his fingers brushing the plaque gently. "We did it, Mama," he whispered. "The world knows your name." As he walked past, the light shifted, and for a fleeting moment, his reflection faded into hers, eternal, peaceful, and proud. The city outside glowed brighter, as though the heavens themselves bowed to grace. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and be part of a journey where every pain finds purpose and every fall rises in grace. Share this tale with someone who believes dignity can still win in a cruel world. Your one comment, your one share, keeps African stories like this alive.